Brandon Bailey. I'm back here on my YouTube channel with some more music discussion videos. I know it's been over a year since I tried to do any of this stuff or really put anything on my YouTube in general, but if you haven't noticed, I'm not in the same place I was before in my videos, and I was just kind of waiting to have a good place to do this sort of thing, and yeah, just kind of figured, I would say fuck it and just kind of do it wherever I feel like, from now on. So you might get some interesting settings here. I might just go outside one day or something, decide to do one of these in a park or something. I don't know, just anywhere I feel like doing it. That works. But without further ado, I figured I'd change it up a little bit instead of doing the full album reviews, and I will still do them in the future. But I feel like this will be funner because it's something I've been getting into. And gotta make a disclaimer at the front that most of this is going to be inspired by watching the YouTube channel Taste Like Music, or Listography, if you're familiar with them from that. And the listography thing is basically something they do, and I don't want to say they invented it or something, because I'm not sure, but they rank all the albums in the way that they do and discuss them and give them like a something out of 5-star rating, and I think it's a great method of doing it, and I love that they have conversations with each other on there. I think that's important. I'm willing to do this by myself for now, obviously, but if somebody would like to discuss some of these bands with me or make suggestions and come on here, I think that'd be awesome. Like, totally not closed off to doing anything. I think that's going to be an awesome experience with this, is just trying to find new music. But I figured I'd start with things that I feel qualified to talk about in a way, like in a very vague way, because obviously I don't, know these people personally, but I do feel like the music that I'm going to talk about has been around with me for a while. And why not start at a better place than, with the quintessential 90s band, Nirvana. It's going to be a controversial video, probably, in a way, with controversial opinions, only because anytime you bring up Nirvana, most opinions about them are going to be controversial, whether it be something positive or negative. I think most people have pretty drastically differing opinions on them, for good or bad, unfortunately. So I guess I'll clear up my piece on them. I mean, I've known about Nirvana probably since I was in the womb, and yeah, I think my mom and a lot of people in the 90s, especially back around the time I was born in the early 90s, people were just obsessed with them and Kurt in general, I think. And when he passed away, it was kind of a huge deal, and that was before I was born. But my mother told me she was like in the hospital and saw like the news for that while she was getting her damn, what is that called? The sonogram. She was getting her sonogram in the hospital and saw the news about that. And yeah, so obviously I wasn't around to understand really how that impacted people. But I mean, you can kind of see it today, because I mean, nobody's really done like what he's done or what they've done to that extent and become so successful at it. And with my personal history of the band, I remember being really young, like a baby or like even a toddler and child, and not really thinking much of them. Like, obviously I knew them and I felt like their songs were catchy, but I didn't, it wasn't my thing at the time. I didn't really understand their approach. Not that I really understood music in general at a young age. I didn't really understand anything about anything. So yeah, then I got into playing music and researching music history. And one of the things that got me really interested in actually pursuing music was discovering heavy metal music, and like especially the origins of it, like going all the way back to Sabbath and Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and then like into the 80s, and then when I discovered like thrash metal and all that stuff and like death metal in the 80s, it really kind of like changed my world. And for me at that time, when I was like 14 to like whatever 19, I think, I just hated anything that wasn't metal. And I mean, I hate to say that now, because like I feel like there's nothing I'm really closed off to listening to or giving a chance. And yeah, I mean, when I was getting into metal at first, because all you hear about Nirvana is that nobody liked them or the grunge bands, and they came out because everybody just wanted, you know, the long hair and, you know, the leather jackets and, you know, the whole 80s look and the, you know, the shreddy guitar solos and shit. And it was just kind of met with a lot of disdain, unfortunately. So me being a very impressionable teenager, you know, seeing all this, you know, all the metal greats from the 80s talk about, oh, Nirvana came along and, you know, Alice in Chains came along and fucked everything up. You know, obviously I don't really think that's the case, but back then it really kind of like anything that was hated by the metal community. And this is kind of something I have a problem with in that style of music, even though I still love heavy metal. I would consider myself a metalhead. But, yeah, I just, yeah, don't like that because it really gives people a bad name for no reason. But I will say this about Nirvana. When I was getting into metal, I had kind of lost a respect for them and bands like them who, you know, people say are like 3-chord bands. They only knew like 3 chords. You know, they couldn't really play their instruments and stuff. But I found that Nirvana, like most grunge bands, like grunge became an exception of metal for me. I mean, if you go on that snobby website Metal Archives, you know, they'll list grunge bands on there as being metal, and I think that grunge was very close to being metal, especially in the alternative and punk scene that it really kind of originates from. And yeah, I always felt that Bleach and some of the songs on Incesticide were very metal, and like they were very doomy and heavy. Like the riffs are heavy, the production's heavy. I mean, he's screaming his fucking ass off on there. Like it's just unmatched rawness. And even back then, when like I knew who Nirvana was, obviously, but like I didn't know songs like Floyd the Barber, for example. And when I heard that for the first time being in the metal, it was like, whoa. Like I didn't know that, you know, it's a simple riff, but I didn't know that they played something that was just like dun 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 dun. You know what I mean? I was like, I was not prepared for the visceralness of Nirvana, I think. And so yeah, while I didn't really respect Kurt mainly for like his instrumental prowess, like I obviously knew there was something there that was being wrongly chastised by like the heavy metal community and shit. Like I knew there was something wrong about that, and they were a band to me that always, like all the grunge bands, like the big ones, you know, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Nirvana and everything like that. Like it just, they're so diverse, you know, you can't really like try to pigeonhole them into one thing, and I think that's kind of the problem with grunge. So anyway, I'll get into the ranking here. You know, I think I said enough about my history of them. I obviously really love Nirvana now. I mean, like, I think they're a great band. They had such a powerful influence, and nobody has really been as successful at what they do more than they are, I think. As far as being a loud, abrasive fucking rock band, like, to the extreme, I think. So yeah, let's get started here. So, I'm going to start at the bottom. That's how I'm going to do these things. I'm going to go from the bottom to the top of my rankings. And, you know, hopefully I can make this more than surface level to a certain extent. But I don't want these videos to go on as long as my album reviews. I mean, if you like that kind of thing, let me know. I'll still do them. You know, obviously I said I'd still do that album reviews, but trying to keep things shorter, you know, keep people's attention span there. Obviously, when you're doing discography rankings, it's a little hard to keep it brief, but I decided to pick a brief one for the first one, considering that Nirvana only really has 3 official studio albums, though and this is going to be one of my controversial takes for this video, is that Incesticide to me has always been an album. It's an album, you know what I mean? Like a studio album. I mean, it is a compilation of different sessions and takes put together, and you could argue that the some of the takeaway from the album is that some of that isn't cohesive enough or whatever, or that there's too many covers versus the originals. Like, whatever it is, I consider it a studio album because it's all studio takes, and a lot of those things, well, I don't even want to say a lot because some of them were on like the Hormoning EP and stuff, but there were songs on there that were unreleased and that you aren't going to get anywhere else, and I do find it to be cohesive, contrary to the popular opinion. So, we have 4 albums here today for Nirvana, and at the bottom is probably going to be, I don't know, my most controversial of the video, because I know this album is beloved. Obviously, I should probably say this, that all these albums are kind of interchangeable to a certain extent, so when I say that this is at the bottom, it doesn't mean I hate it, it doesn't mean that I won't listen to it or that I don't like it. It's just I'm trying to do this both as objectively and subjectively as possible. Like, what makes it cohesive and good, like as far as production and, you know, listenability and that sort of thing, and return value. But all of that is also subjective to a certain extent too, because it's a matter of like, what do I want to hear? You know what I mean? What do I enjoy the most? What do I get out of it? And for that sake, I have to put In Utero at the bottom, and still a 3 out of 5 star for me, which is great, honestly. Like, it takes a lot to get a perfect album out of me, you know what I mean? I'm not just going to hand away 5 stars unless it's something that, you know, I am very passionate about. But yeah, 3 out of 5 I think is great for In Utero. It has 2 out of my top 10s of their top 10 songs on it. It is a very chaotic album. You know, like, there's just so much abrasive noise and feedback and stuff, and I think that's kind of what turns me off from a lot of the production. But like I was saying earlier in the premise to this, I don't think any band ever has been as successful, you know, or tasteful, I want to say tasteful lightly, about utilizing noise and feedback and that sort of thing to add an atmosphere to the album, if you will. I mean, I know it's just kind of how they were, but it is the atmosphere of it. And yeah, regardless of that, I do feel like it's mixed very well. Like, Steve Albini did a really good job making all the loudness of this album work. And there are moments, you know, that, like, I don't know if I've ever listened to this whole album through with headphones on, but I always say, like, if I were to put headphones on through the whole thing, like, there's a good chance I'd fucking just chuck them across the room, like when radio friendly unit shifter comes on and the feedback just like, I'd just be like, oh, like. But that's not, there's good moments of that song too, you know what I mean? I'm not gonna say I hate that song, because I mean, like, the feedback doesn't last long enough for me to be like, oh my god, this is unbearable, like Lou Reed's Metal Machine music or something, you know? But yeah, it is mixed very well for being so loud and not as polished, like purposefully not as polished as Nevermind. And yeah, the loudest moments give you like this, you know, kind of like the White Stripes. I think Jack White and Meg White talked about that in the White Stripes. They wanted to get that sound where, like, it sounded like your speakers were broken, like the sound's just fucking exploding out of it. And In Utero is that Nirvana album. It is the one where the speakers are just fucking exploding on all ends. So yeah, I think that's pretty impressive to pull off. It's easily their most varied track list too, which, ironically enough for me, is like usually something that makes me really interested in an album. Like the White Album, for example, by the Beatles. Very varied, and, you know, we'll get there one day, but that could possibly still be my favorite Beatles album. Though I don't think that that's something that makes this album stand out amongst the other Nirvana albums for me. It's only varied in the sense that you got a lot of different vibes. Like, you got like their heaviest moments, you got some of their hookiest moments, you got some really good acoustic, mellow, somber moments on here. noisy moments, just straight up punk moments. There's just so much genre variation on here, and it's all the things that Nirvana does, I think, which is great. Every element on this album, though, like I was saying, with Steve Albini's production is just brasher than ever before. Like, people think Bleach is like the rawest album, and it's like, really, this album, like, Bleach doesn't hold a candle to In Utero, because it's just so abrasive, it's just so crazy how much brasher the drums and the guitar tones and the vocals and the bass, everything is just so much, like, more gainy, like, distorted in a way, and not natural. It almost doesn't sound natural to a way, like something's been done to it. But, the moments of feedback, like, in that sense, are pretty awful because they're pretty abrasive, but not enough to turn me off. Like I said, they don't last enough to turn me off. And yeah, there's some great moments on here. I can't lie. Like, there's amazing songs on here. I'd be remiss to say that I didn't enjoy a lot of the tracks on this album. And we'll get to that. We'll get to talking about specific songs. But, this album had a lot of contenders, like honorable mentions for my top 10. Okay, now, the next album that I'm going to talk about, probably another controversial pick, because I know a lot of people see this as being, sort of the birth of grunge, right? And, it is a great album. Don't get me wrong, very influential to me. If I was probably back at 15, 16 years old, like I was saying, this might be my number one, just because of the heaviness and intensity of it. Of course, I'm talking about Bleach, their debut album. Giving it another 3 out of 5 stars. Not perfect, but I do enjoy it quite a bit. And I return to all these albums all the time. I listen to Nirvana quite a bit, you know what I mean? I go back to listen to them. They're like one of those bands, it's like, I don't know what I'm going to listen to today. It's like, well, there's Nirvana, you know what I mean? They're fun to listen to. So, Bleach, got 3 of my top 10 songs in it. It's got the most out of any of their albums for my top 10s, but we'll get into why that doesn't really matter for how I'm ranking these, though. That is important to note, though, because sometimes if an album's overloaded with my favorites, it can easily win me over. Anyway, Bleach, rawest album, heaviest album. I don't think they had more quote-unquote metal moments than on Bleach here. Like, it's just so raw and hardcore, and yeah, nothing. There wasn't much like it any time before this. Obviously I think they got the Melvins to help them out with making this album. If you know the Melvins, you know that it sounds pretty similar to the way that they sounded, like very similar. But there was other bands, out at that time, like Soundgarden and Mudhoney and Green River and stuff, that they were doing grunge too, but I think that this captures, like, what people think of when they think of grunge, for sure. Yeah, it was, like I said, it was influential to me, kind of being a metalhead and not liking music that was different than traditional heavy metal music, It was all about, like, fuck posers and all this shit, it was kind of dumb. I feel dumb for being like that, but I'm glad I kind of got out of that, really. And I'd encourage anybody else who's prejudiced towards any other sort of music to do the same, you know what I mean? To give something a chance. You never know what you like, especially if you're a musician or an artist. Like, I just don't feel like I have any business spreading hate around to people. So, without further ado, I'll go on about it. The drums aren't the best on Bleach. I think a lot of people say that. I think I was kind of misled as a child. A lot of people told me that Dave Grohl was like a terrible drummer as a child. Like, they were like, oh, he plays the shittiest stuff, like he's so terrible. Like, and I think they were talking about Chad Channing, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not even going to say that Chad's bad. Like, I do like the drumming on this album. It's just, Dave Grohl is one of my top 5, 10 drummers of all time. I do really like everything he's ever done. And, yeah, I just, Chad and Dave, I can't really, like, compare the two because they have different approaches. You know, I think Chad's playing was more riff based with, you know, like obviously, like I said, Floyd Barber, you know, the drums are just doing that bum, 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 you know, and in School, like he's just playing, and I've heard a lot of controversy about whether people like the drums on School or not, and I think they're great. You know, he's just complimenting the riff with the accents on the snare and the kick and shit. Might not be the tightest drummer, but for their first album, you know, and for such a raw band's debut album, I don't think it could have gone better in that sense. They're still heavy, and they sound like they are mixed very well. I think it's easily their most underrated album, though. There's songs on here that, you know, a lot of people probably don't ever mention, like Mr. Mustache, The Big Cheese, stuff like that, Swap Meet. Like, it's just, I don't know, it's kind of a shame that it's underrated because they only have so much music, right? But it is. I don't think people talk about Bleach enough. I mean, even in the Unplugged thing, he said, this is a song from our first album, you know, if anyone bought it or whatever he says, you know? And I just think that's sad that the only thing people know from it really is, like, about a girl. I think there's way more to offer here if you're into this sort of thing. It does have noisy moments, like In Utero, and Incesticide kind of does to certain extents, but yeah, they're definitely nowhere near as bad as on In Utero, without a doubt. Like, on Bleach, they're just kind of like short feedback things, you know, like, and there's moments where his vocals are kind of like quavering and in places that, you know, aren't the greatest, strongest things, but that was kind of his approach. I mean, who might judge that? So yeah, lots of good songs on here, very heavy, and that's why Bleach is at my third spot. Alright, so this one is controversial for me personally, my second pick here. Incesticide, also at 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, these albums are pretty interchangeable to me. They're similar in so many ways, but yet you can compare them in so many different ways too. But the reason I say Incesticide's controversial for me, not only because a lot of people don't even consider it a real album, though why not? They only have 3, so give them one more, you know what I mean? Like, Christ. It's got 2 of my top 10 songs on it that, you know, and I'm not going to get into what those are yet, but I will say that if this were, you know, maybe even a few years ago, where Incesticide was number 1 for me, it would probably have so many more in the top 10, I swear. Like, there's so many songs, almost every song except for maybe like 2 on Incesticide could be considered honorable mentions for me. There's just so many good moments on there that, you know, make my hair stand on end or, you know, just do something for me. So, anyway, talk about the album. It's definitely their most, quote-unquote, punk release. Obviously, they were very influenced by punk and alternative and a lot of, I don't know, I don't even want to call punk outsider music, but I feel like that's kind of what they got out of it. And, yeah, it's definitely, it's not like hardcore punk. There's some hardcore elements on here, but it's more in that, like, pop punk, sort of straightforward, 70s punk kind of vein is what I mean by that. Like, everything's very power chordy and just thrashy, yeah, and abrasive. His vocals are screamed like crazy all the time. It's nuts. Does have some of their strongest moments where the rawness and heaviness that they had on the first album meets the melodicism, and they blend just seamlessly, just so fucking well. Like, and I get that a lot of this album, some of that might be because it's from different sessions with different drummers and different lineups and different producers, different studios, but the mix of the songs on here just seems so well balanced. I just can't say what it is. It just seems so perfect to me, even though it's imperfect. So, yeah, I really enjoy the writing on all of these songs. All of the covers on here, as controversial as some of their inclusions may be, to me are seamless in the track list and amazing. I wouldn't go as far as to say that all of them are, you know, the essential versions of those songs. But for example, Son of a Gun, you know, by the Vaselines, I think I like that version more than the Vaselines version. And I think the Vaselines sound beautiful, you know what I mean? They have a great sound, and I really do enjoy their music too. But yeah, there's just something about that Ramones-y kind of quality to Son of a Gun versus the original, and the way that Kurt sings it. It brings about this vibe with the sunshine in the bedroom when we play. You know, like that whole thing, being a musician, that just has always resonated to me. Always kind of puts a smile on my face. And yeah, it's definitely similar to Bleach and the heaviness and the riffs sometimes, and, you know, the production. Like I said, that may have to do with some of the songs having Chad Channing on drums, or being produced by Sub Pop and shit, Jack and Dino. But yeah, I do find it very similar to Bleach. Most of the mixes between the sessions are cohesive because, you know, in spite of all that stuff, like I was saying, I do think that's a strong point that they were able to make so many differing sessions mix well as far as the track list. I couldn't say any more good things about that. The only obvious thing is the drum sound. You know, when you listen to each song, the guitars and the bass and the vocals, they don't sound very different from each other. Maybe the quality of the audio does a little bit, but I do believe that the drums are the most apparent thing. When you go from, I don't know, let's say Aero Zeppelin to Aneurysm or something, you know what I mean? You can tell. You can tell that the drums are mixed and played by a different person. Though when I was a baby, or younger, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I would have just thought that it was Dave Grohl, because like I said, everybody told me that Dave Grohl was the drummer for Nirvana, so I wouldn't have thought different. Another thing about Incesticide I want to add before I move on is that it's got, to me, as a guitar player, mainly a guitar player, I play a lot of instruments, but yeah, as someone who focuses on guitar most when I'm listening to music, and that's what I get the most out of enjoyment, you know, be that to my detriment or not sometimes, I do believe that this album has their most interesting guitar work of all their albums. And I mean that in so many different ways. Like, it's got great solos, to me, with some of his tightest playing. Some of them are sloppy, purposefully, but there's moments on here that are just so weird and just so unique to his style and everything that I've always really loved it. And I think it has, if I'm to count, I didn't actually go through their discography and count how many songs have solos, but for a band that people associate with kind of killing the guitar solo, or making guitar solos or lead guitar not important, or all this stuff, you know, they're just a 3-chord fucking nobody punk band, you know, fuck that shit, dude. They got guitar solos. All the grunge bands, all the alt rock bands, they had guitar solos, man, and they were good. There's some that are super catchy. Doesn't always need to be crazy, you know, and shreddy to be good. It's good to be simple and melodic sometimes too. Sometimes it's good to be noisy and chaotic, you know, at the same time. Kurt obviously knew his limitations and his abilities, and, you know, he played them to his strengths in each of these songs, I think. And I love how he just kind of seems like he doesn't give a fuck about what he's doing. That is probably the most appealing thing about his work to me, is the sarcasm, the satire, and the just not giving a fuck about, you know, whether somebody's going to like what he's doing, or whether it's quote-unquote right, because there is no right way to do something in music, really. So, yeah, without further ado, I want to say that this album seems to have the most guitar solos, lead guitar moments, and guitar work that interests me on it. Alright, so you guys know what is number one then, right? And this in itself is a controversial pick too, right? Because, you know, for a lot of people, this is number one. This is one of the greatest albums of all time. One of the greatest albums of the 90s. One of the greatest albums of 92 when it came out. You know, it's kind of insane, the zeitgeist that this album, Nevermind, of course, that we're speaking of, has around it. And for a lot of people, some of that is a reason for them to knock it down and whatnot. And I can't say I disagree. That's kind of like what Nirvana's all about. They've spoken out about the album themselves, or Kurt did. It's more profoundly. But yeah, it's hard. I'll be hard pressed not to rank this one not only objectively at number one for the reasons I'll mention, but subjectively too. I just overall enjoy this listen more than any of their albums, which is why I give it a whole ass 4.5 stars, 1.5 above all of the rest of their releases, because yeah, it just seems to be that special in their catalog to me, regardless of the overproduction. We'll get into that. It does have, like, the other 3 albums. Bleach is the only one, is that I have 3 top 10s. This one I have 2 top 10s off of it. It does have a very pristine sound for a Nirvana album, I will say that. But for a rock album in general, I think it, compared to more other abrasive, punky, more hardcore, noisy albums, it is just so clean sounding, and I do like that. Not being someone that prefers overproduction out the ass to anything, but I do think that there's just such a fine line being drawn with Nevermind. The strongest track list, back to front, on any of their albums, easily. There's not a moment on this that I would fucking throw in the trash, you know what I mean? No songs in this that I would be like, why is this on here? Why did they do this? You know, like, absolutely not. Every song is very good. And let me stress this very much here, because I listen to discographies in order when I do these sort of things, and when I go and try to dive into a band. And let me tell you, when you go from Bleach to Nevermind, there's one thing I gotta tell you, and it's Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl, man. Holy shit, the difference that this dude makes just in the choices of his drum fills and everything. I think Taste Like Music said it the best. He just plays hooky drum parts. His drums are like hooks in themselves, and I really like that. I like the way that sounds, because I feel that very much so. You know, people say that, like, Ringo Starr is a serviceable drummer because he wasn't, like, the most showy or anything like that, and I do feel like that applies to Dave as well. But I mean, I've seen so many videos of Dave playing drums, and he's much more than just serviceable. He just isn't a show-off, I don't think, you know? It was just great, and especially on this album, fit all of his parts into the right places and makes all of the songs stand out that much more because of his presence on here. After this, you know, every moment with Dave after this is just like a breath of fresh air to me. So, it's front-loaded with singles, probably a reason that makes it a bit overrated and controversial, because to me that's, like, not my favorite thing to do with track lists. Personally, even when I'm making my own stuff, I don't just want to, like, put all the things that I think are going to be hits or singles at the front. I want it to be cohesive because it's cohesive. I want the album to have a flow, ebbs and flows, kind of tell a story to a certain extent, even if it's not conceptual. And, you know, like, I don't know if they did that intentionally, but, you know, the first 4 or 5 songs on this album are just straight up the singles on the album, and the songs that everybody associates with Nirvana, whether you really know who they are and know all their songs or not. Like, so I kind of feel that, especially because it opens up with the song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of like, okay, I kind of see, like, where people are coming from with the overratedness. It really doesn't take away from my enjoyability, though, because I can pop this album on in headphones, and the whole listen just is, like, mesmerizing. Even Smells Like Teen Spirit to me. So, I feel it deserves the accolades it gets because of the song's qualities, like the songwriting quality and the production quality alone. Like, just makes this album soar over the top of the rest of their releases. For me. Everyone's going to have different opinions. Like I said, if I was younger, I probably would not put Nevermind at the top at all. I would easily put Incesticide at the top. Nevermind probably be somewhere above In Utero at the bottom or something. Now, who knows? But for me, right now, Nevermind is clearly the top contender. I don't think there's any debating it for me anymore. All of the guitar tones, they feel so unique to this album, which, like I said, guitar is something I listen for a lot, especially in a band that has surprising guitar moments like them, where people don't associate them with maybe guitar virtuosity so much and stuff like that, and having killer tones and that sort of thing. But man, like you couldn't tell me that the tones on this album don't sound like they belong to this album, especially the clean ones. I think that's, in my notes, which is what I wrote down, had the most impact on me, was just how good all of the clean tones, whether it's a guitar with chorus on it, or just the raw chords and lithium, you know, or something in the way, or poly, where the acoustic guitar, it's just mixed so well. Oh my god, dude. Like, and I know a lot of people complain about the distorted tones on here too. They say it sounds like a shitty Metal Zone pedal or something like that, or, you know, the speakers are broken or something. But is that not like what Kurt was like always going for with his guitar tone? I mean, if you like Nirvana, I don't see how that's something that turns you off, because I think that they sound way better on here. You know what I mean? Like, I think the guitar tones, even the distorted ones, are just unmatched compared to their other albums. Now, this was very hard to do because, like I said, the albums are very interchangeable for me. But, you know, it is what it is. You know, this is why we do these rankings. This is why we do these discussions. I have to find some sort of justification for why I like something more than something else, especially when all these albums feel so close to me, and they've been so influential in my life and important to me as well. Like I said, I'll go back to any of these, listen to them any day, you know, and not really prefer one over the other. It's more so about the songs on them, in which case we will get to in the next video. So, I hope you enjoyed my ranking of the Nirvana studio album discography plus Incesticide, if that's how you want to, you know, consider this. I was very tempted to include MTV Unplugged, but I was like, that's too far. I was like, that's a live album. It does have a lot of songs that you're not going to find other places, but yeah, can't do that. You know, I just couldn't include that just because I like it. So, yeah, I will make the exception for Incesticide, though. So, if you like what I'm doing, you like these things, please let me know. You know, I'm going to do them anyway because they're fun to me. But if you have, like, suggestions, you have bands you want to throw at me, especially if it's stuff I'm not familiar with or that you can challenge me with, that would be awesome. I'm going to try and knock out as many of my favorite bands that like I said, I feel qualified to speak at length about. Trying to do the ones that I can get through their discographies a little quicker too at first, you know. Not trying to pack it all on at once, but I do want to make these interesting, and I do want to talk about music that I love truly first, and, you know, get people on here to discuss stuff with me, my bandmates, whatever, whoever the hell it is, it doesn't matter. Let's talk about some music, you know, have a good time. You know, y'all have a great day. I will see you in the next video with my top 10 Nirvana songs. So, thank you for watching, and please subscribe, ring the bell, you know, all that stuff. I appreciate any support.